The last guest. Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, there stood an old inn known as the Hollow Hearth Inn. Isolated by miles of dense forest and shrouded in perpetual mist, the inn was a relic of a bygone era. It had long since fallen off the maps, yet it continued to stand, its faded wooden sign swaying in the cold wind, creaking like the lament of forgotten souls. Locals whispered tales of the inn. They said it was cursed, that no one who stayed there ever truly left. But travelers, lured by the promise of shelter, warm food, and the romantic idea of an old mountain inn, occasionally stumbled upon it. They were greeted warmly, fed hearty meals, and offered a cozy room. And then, they were never seen again. The arrival. It was late October when Karen, a freelance photographer chasing the fall foliage, found herself lost in the winding mountain roads. Her GPS had long since lost signal, and the sun was sinking fast. Just as the first fingers of twilight stretched across the sky, she spotted a light flickering through the trees. The inn appeared out of nowhere, as if the forest itself had parted to reveal it. Its windows glowed warmly, and smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Karen hesitated. Something about the inn felt off, but the chill in the air and the encroaching darkness made her decision for her. As she approached, a man in his late 60s stepped onto the porch. His face was deeply lined, but his smile was welcoming. "Evening, miss. You look like you could use a place to rest," he said, his voice smooth and rich like aged whiskey. Karen nodded. "I got lost. My car's just down the road. Is it okay if I stay the night?" "Of course. I'm Walter, the innkeeper. Let me grab your bags." Inside, the inn was as charming as it was eerie. A grand fireplace roared in the lobby, and the scent of something delicious wafted from the kitchen. Karen couldn't help but feel comforted, though a small voice in the back of her mind urged her to leave. Walter handed her a key. "Room 7 at the end of the hall. Dinner will be served in an hour." Karen thanked him and headed upstairs. The hallway was dimly lit, the wooden floorboards groaning under her weight. Her room was quaint, with an antique four-poster bed, lace curtains, and an oil lamp flickering on the nightstand. She set her things down and glanced out the window. What she saw made her heart stop. The forest outside was gone. In its place was a dense, swirling fog that seemed alive, pressing against the glass as if trying to force its way in. Dinner with strangers. Karen shook off her unease and headed to the dining room. A long table was set with fine china and silverware. 5 other guests were already seated, all of them oddly silent. Walter appeared with a steaming pot of stew and began serving. "Where are you folks headed?" Karen asked, trying to break the ice. The others exchanged uneasy glances. A young man with a haunted look finally spoke. I was heading to a friend's cabin. Got lost and ended up here." "Same," said a woman clutching a rosary. "This place wasn't on my map." Karen frowned. "It's strange, isn't it? How we all ended up here." Walter chuckled, his laugh a little too hearty. "Fate has a funny way of bringing people together." As the meal went on, Karen noticed the other guests seemed increasingly uneasy. They barely touched their food, and their eyes darted nervously to the windows, where the fog had grown thicker. "Excuse me," Karen said, addressing Walter. "Do you have any phone signal here? I need to let someone know where I am." Walter's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Afraid not, miss. But don't worry. You're safe here. Safe." The word rang hollow. The first night. That night, Karen struggled to sleep. She kept hearing strange noises, soft whispers, faint footsteps, and the creak of floorboards outside her door. At one point, she thought she saw shadows moving under the crack of her door. But when she mustered the courage to look, the hallway was empty. Around 3 a.m., she was jolted awake by a loud bang. Heart racing, she grabbed her camera, her only weapon, and crept out into the hallway. The door to room 5 was ajar. She pushed it open and froze. The young man from dinner was lying on the floor, his eyes wide and lifeless. His mouth was open in a silent scream, and his body was contorted as if he'd been trying to crawl away from something. Karen stumbled back, her scream caught in her throat, and ran to find Walter. She found him in the lobby, stoking the fire as if nothing was amiss. "There's a dead man in room 5, she cried. Walter didn't even look up. "Go back to your room, miss. The safer there." Karen stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean a safer? We need to call the police." Walter sighed and finally met her eyes. "The inn doesn't let anyone leave, Karen. The best you can do is stay in your room and hope it doesn't choose you next." The truth. The remaining guests gathered in the dining room at dawn. The young man's body was gone, and Walter refused to speak of it. The others shared their stories, how they had all tried to leave in the middle of the night, only to find themselves back at the inn, no matter which direction they went. "It's the fog," the woman with the rosary whispered. "It's alive, and it hungers." Karen tried to make sense of it. "But why? What is this place?" Walter entered the room, his face grave. "The inn is a gateway, a trap. It feeds on the living to sustain itself. I've been here for decades, trying to keep it satisfied, but it's growing restless." "Then why don't you just let it take you?" one of the guests snapped. Walter's eyes darkened. "Because it doesn't work that way. The inn doesn't let its keeper go." The escape. Determined to break free, Karen rallied the others. Armed with flashlights and whatever makeshift weapons they could find, they decided to make a run for it. The fog was suffocating, its icy tendrils clawing at their skin as they stumbled through the woods. The sounds of the inn, creaking wood, faint laughter, and the toll of an unseen bell echoed around them, growing louder the farther they ran. One by one, the fog claimed them. The woman with the rosary was the first to disappear, her screams swallowed by the mist. Then a burly man, dragged into the shadows by an unseen force. Karen ran until her lungs burned, refusing to look back. When she finally burst through the fog, she found herself back at the inn. The front door swung open, and Walter stood there, his expression one of weary resignation. "I told you," he said softly. "The inn doesn't let anyone leave." The last guest. Karen stayed at the inn for months, maybe years. Time had lost all meaning. She watched as new guests arrived, each one hopeful, each one doomed. She tried to warn them, but they never listened. And then, one day, Walter disappeared. Karen woke to find his room empty, his chair by the fire cold. The inn had chosen her as its new keeper. Now, when travelers stumble upon the Hollow Hearth Inn, they're greeted by a woman with kind eyes and a sad smile. "Evening," she says. "You look like you could use a place to rest."